The concept of demolition in Detroit have been, in a way, synonymous for years. Whether it's acres of blight, landmarks like empty factories, or old schools, part of Detroit's comeback story has been about tearing things down. There's a lot to unpack here, and we will, but a couple of things that I find interesting in today's conversation with Detroit's construction and demolition director, LaJuan Counts, is to look into the why something gets demolished. But also, despite the news today that more of the historic Packard Plant is coming down, how the season of demolition is winding down in the city of Detroit, and what that means for the future. I am Jairus Days, and for your Daily Detroit on Monday, March 4th, 2024, we're going to talk about all of that. As always, feedback, dailydetroit@gmail.com, or leave a voicemail, 313-789-3211. And thanks to our members on Patreon at patreon.com/dailydetroit for making this conversation possible. Let's get started. Joining me at the table at the Daily Detroit studio at Techtown is LaJuan Counts. She is the Director of Construction and Demolition at the City of Detroit. Welcome to the show. I really appreciate you coming here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the invite.
For sure. And, this conversation is interesting to me because whether it's building up or coming down, this is a topic that just gets people going. And what you work with gets people going in so many ways. I feel like the first thing is, how do you deal with that pressure and kind of what's your North Star? Because this is something that gets a lot of attention with the city.
The topic of demolition in particular is quite polarizing across the city. A lot of the negative side of it is rooted in the distrust that the community had with the program in general. And so from the very beginning, my strategy was that I needed to make sure that the community was engaged and that they were completely understanding, what the process was, what a good demo looked like, so that they could, hold us accountable. If you saw a demo that did not look like how we told you it should look, call us out on it. We would make those corrections. And then we needed to also just be honest. And so from the very beginning, my focus and my center was always about making sure that the community was the central focus, that them being comfortable with our process and understanding how everything was going, and then being pleased with our work, that was our goal. And taking the properties down was secondary, but making sure that the residents were clear on how that process should happen was more important.
You mentioned the idea of a good demo. I know it's got to be different for different properties, but what are a couple of things that are key to a good demo in your mind?
For us, all demos have to go the same way. Does not matter if it's residential or commercial, regardless of the complexity. Each property has to be surveyed, so we have to determine what materials are in that property that need to be removed prior to. Each property has to be abated, and then we follow that abatement with certifying that the materials were actually removed. So against the survey, against the work that was performed, it has to be cleared that that work was actually completed, and then it's ready for demo. And during that demolition process, we provide what's called a wet, wet, wet method. So throughout the entire process that the demo activity is taking place, there has to be at least 2 hoses on it to make sure that we don't have any migratory dust issues. We also have to make sure that we've got eyes from our department watching that process as it happens. It has to be loaded out. We have to get approval from Buildings and Safety saying that the hole is completely empty and clear, so we get a open hole approval. The dirt that goes back into the hole has to be from an approved source, and that has a whole separate process in order to reach approval. Once that work is completed, we have another inspection by BSEED to ensure that the grade that is performed meets city code and standard. And then we are able to actually seed and straw. And then the final step is to ensure that any damaged sidewalks are replaced. That's what we consider a good demo. All of those steps have to be hit. If for some reason something is missed, that to me is a bad demo. It does not matter which stage in the phase. If a step is missed or done incorrectly, that to me is a bad demo. So we have worked very, very hard to ensure that we are consistent across the board and managed to do that time in and time out for over 5,000 demos.
You were very detailed with your answer around this, and I can't help but think your background helps inform you in this job because you're somebody who has a background in construction and working with that stuff. How has that informed you into this, and what is the same and different between working before and now working with the city?
The demo world is actually quite different from construction. And my background is construction, degree from Michigan State University in construction management. At the time, over 25 years of experience in construction itself, and to be quite honest, when I came to the demo department, I kind of was like, Demo is like the lowest rung of construction, right? But it is such an intricate process if done safely, right? And so understanding how just the process of construction, that's how made my changes on the demo side, right? We took the core principles of construction project management and layered it in on our demo process. And that was kind of the only thing that was really missing for us. What's different for me from coming to the city as opposed to working in private industry is the role of the owner, right? A lot of times you don't quite understand what your boundaries are as an owner. I guess I never really thought about it, but it's one of those things where you can't overstep your boundaries, although you are in control of the process, but you don't want to overmanage. As it relates to the demo side, it's being more engaged, which is a lot of times hard for outside contractors to understand that as a very educated owner, because our department is very educated to the process, both on the construction and the demo side, that we are going to really watch each step of the process. Unlike I'm just going to write the check kind of owner, we provide our own steps. We have our own processes and protocols, and we expect the contractor to follow it. And that's the difference of construction from the city standpoint in relationship to probably any other municipality that has any types of contract, construction, or demolition efforts.
Also, you've got all eyes on you. You're doing this work in a major city, and understandably so, lots of people have feelings, whether it's, I'm very excited that this is happening because it's an eyesore, or even, and I learned this as a resident, you have people who are like, hey, I remember the families that used to live there, and the demolition is emotional for them because it's like, oh, well, that's where Mrs. Smith and, Jane and John used to play, and it makes me feel a certain way about my neighborhood. Either I'm excited about it or I'm also excited, but also also sad. There's so much emotion in this topic I have found.
There is. And it's both ways too, though. Some of it is people have fond memories of those locations, and some of our residents don't have fond memories of those locations. So it's important to keep that all in balance when you are attacking these properties. And that's why we try and be as respectful as we can when we go out to the communities and have the conversations about, listen, these are the demos that are coming in your area. We share those locations. We instituted the block by block program to capture the history about some of those locations, some of the schools and some of the commercial properties, so that we could preserve that history. But we do have some residents who are happy to see some of these properties go because they have very negative memories of those locations as well.
And that's one thing to remember, is that everybody's going to have different experiences and different thoughts, and they're all valid because they come from their life experience.
Correct.
So one thing I've noticed as of late is an uptick in some historic demolitions as of late. And one of the things that I've noticed about that is that it's often situations where a building has been sitting for a very long time. I will be driving through the city or whatever, and there are some beautiful structures, but there's also been a lot of neglect. And so when you think about that historic piece, and I think that's one of the pieces that gets people most fired up online, when you think about the historic piece, like what are some of the pieces that you're going into when you're like, hey, you know what? It's time. We're going to have to take this thing down.
For me, it's lack of safety attached to those facilities, whether it's a house or a commercial structure. We encounter a lot of places that they look great from the outside. You step foot inside or you have an aerial shot and you see just how bad, the conditions are.
There's a old 2-flat in my neighborhood that on the outside you drive by, you just think it's boarded up. You go around the back. So I walked around the back with my dog. There's nothing in there. It is just walls and a tree.
Yes.
But on the outside, you would think, oh, I could save this, or why doesn't this get rehabbed or whatever? And you realize at this point, it is just a shell.
Correct. And for me, I'm in the construction industry, right? So when I look at properties, I'm looking at things based on square footage costs for improvements or renovations. Same thing with demos. When I decide that that's what we probably need to do, same thing. I'm comparing costs all the time. And there was one particular structure, and I was excited about it. I was like, oh, we're going to petition to get this one off the list because I feel like it's a property that we could renovate for the city.
So you actively, in your mind, look for places that you can save if you can.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
If something comes across my desk and I'll have questions, I'll look at the survey, I'll look into it further. My staff, the consultants that work for us, if they come across a property and they'll ask the question like, hey, maybe we should look at this again. We're just executing a service, and the decision to demo usually comes from a different entity, whether it's from buildings and safety or from the land bank or the development team. We're just executing a service. But sometimes we do come across properties and we'll bring those up. But this one particular one was a school, and I thought that this would be a great location for us to relocate our headquarters to. And at the time, we were in the process of doing our own build out. Well, not doing the build out, but we were going to contract it. I focused my attentions on doing an estimate on what it would take for us to renovate the space. And at $32 million, I could not justify spending the city's resources to that extent just for us to have offices. And so I was like, you know what, it's going to stay on the demo list. I'm not going to, advocate for it to come off because it's not economically feasible for us to do. It also probably is not going to be economically feasible for a private entity to manage either. And it's those types of scenarios where I don't think a lot of times the public is not really considering how expensive it is to renovate.
And things have gotten even more expensive lately. That's one of the rabbit hole I wanted to go down was, is the increase in labor, materials, all of that, is that affecting what gets on the list or what can be saved nowadays?
Not so much. The determination to demo is really more so the safety component. That's really the stronger push, as opposed to those decisions that are made like by the land bank or by our development arm. They consider those costs, those renovation costs, in relationship to how interested would an outside party be to purchase the property and then be able to provide, the resources to actually perform the renovation. But as far as we're concerned, the increase of costs, it's across the board. It's increased on the demo side as well as on the renovation side as well.
Okay. I know that you're also working to provide jobs as well and provide work and kind of involve Detroiters in the process because in the past, and many years past, and I've been around the city for a minute, as you have too, there have been various times of concern that like, these things are being demolished, but the city residents aren't benefiting as much. But I know that especially in recent years, there's been some work that you all have been doing on that.
Correct. There is a component inside of Proposal N that advocated for Detroit residents. So they were interested in Detroit-based businesses as well as Detroit residents working on this demo effort. And so right out the gate, we had over 60% of the contracts that were released went to Detroit-based businesses, whether they were Detroit-based or Detroit headquartered. And we continue to this day to advocate for their employees to be Detroit residents. We track it. We ask the questions. Our people are on site when those demos happen, and they literally walk up to the teams that show up and ask, Detroit resident or not Detroit resident. We know it's a topic that the residents are interested in. A lot of us are Detroit residents as well. And so we're interested in making sure that our fellow residents are working too.
Yeah. You mentioned Proposal N. For those who don't know, Proposal N is crucial to this entire demolition program. Why don't we kind of walk people through what N is and what it enables you to do?
So Proposal N was a $250 million bond initiative that supported the demolition of 8,000 residential structures and was intended to stabilize another 8,000. Before we were able to get Proposal N approved, the land bank had already sold about 2,000 of those stabilized properties, and we moved forward with trying to get to about 6,000. We ended up being at about 14,000 total properties that would be impacted through Proposal N.
And how much more demolition do we have ahead?
We are slowly sunsetting this program. So today,
So you're hoping that one day you don't have to have as big of a job with demolition as you do?
yes, to answer that question, we kind of knew from the very beginning that we were going to always work ourselves out of work. I do have to find other opportunities for my staff who I have. Other than that, yes, we are slowly sunsetting this program. We are about 5,500 demos completed to date, and we've got a little over another 2,000 to complete. We anticipate probably being through those by the end of the year. So we are coming to a close on the demo side. Yes.
Wow. So will there be like a maintenance component to it of a few over time or?
There will always be demos of varying capacities. There'll be emergencies or there'll be the ordered demos. What Proposal N really kind of addressed was the collection of ordered demos that the city just did not have a process to address. And so moving forward, we've established that we're going to have to do so many. We don't know exactly how many we'll have to continue to do, but yes, there will be for lack of a better thing to call it, like a maintenance plan where we typically encounter about 400 emergency demos throughout the year. And we're thinking maybe about another 200 in ordered demos, but that final number we're not really certain of because we've never been in this situation before, but we're hopeful that that'll be the standard. It'll be probably in that 400 to 500 range total between the two.
So let's talk about the other side of your title, which is construction. What does that mean in this context as director of construction?
The construction actually is kind of twofold. We're responsible for over 150 city-owned facilities. So on the maintenance side of things, we're responsible for making sure that the heat is on and that the lights are working and that the doors are opening and closing, just the baseline maintenance and care of our city-owned facilities. But then my team is also responsible for the capital improvements for those locations as well. So if it's a new rec center or the new addition for the Farwell Rec Center, my team is managing that. We're responsible for police and fire locations, this fire station right down the street.
Mm-hmm. Leave that shield. That shield looks so cool on the corner of it.
We don't have any plans to take it down. Fire's really intentional about their artwork that they put up. So,
and there's so much history connected to it, right?
Correct. A lot of the firehouses are quite old, and I know they've got more than two that are over 100 years old. So,
oh, really?
Yes, firehouses that's a very serious deal.
I bet. So for you, what's next? What are you thinking about going forward?
Right now it's to stay focused on what's at hand. A lot of things can change in the next couple of years. I don't know what that means. I've been preparing my team, listen, I've got to make sure that I transfer all the knowledge that I have about all of my processes, everything that I've learned over the last 30 years in construction and the last 7 years with the city. I've got to transfer that knowledge to them so that I can prepare them for whatever is to come. And so that's really my focus, as well as trying to make sure that I create opportunities and venues for other Detroiters and especially other people of color into the construction industry while I have this platform and this focus so that others can see that there's opportunities for them here in construction, which historically has just not been here for us.
Yeah. Breaking into that is a really huge deal. And I've seen a number of stories, especially when it comes to women and when it comes to minorities. It's sometimes very difficult to get into that industry.
It is.
I feel like you've had some life experiences with that.
I have. In the very beginning, I often talk about how I was never seen as a threat. I was this young Black girl who, how long is she going to be here really, right? So yeah, she's going to ask me a bunch of questions, but she's not going to be here in a week or so. Like, it's whatever. And so I'd use that as, to my advantage. I asked every question I could, and I was fortunate that for a significant amount of my starting in the business, I wasn't a threat. Little did they know, I was laying in wait to be a threat later. But I used that to my advantage. I started to get the tension that it was a problem not too long after I came to the city. And the lack of respect that I was getting from contractors in the very beginning, that was frustrating because at this point, I'm 10 years into the business. You're not still around 10 years if you don't know what you're doing.
So the paradigm changed because you had control of the checks.
Correct.
Do you feel like that threatened people or made them uncomfortable?
No, I don't think that it wasn't a threat at all. It was just disregard. It kind of was that standard. At that time, you really did not have an experienced or educated owner. What you had was someone who was probably from accounting or probably from, more the business side of the house.
They were providing the service. You described demolition as a service. They were providing the service, but they didn't know the intricacies of that service.
Correct. They just literally wrote the check. And that was it. If a contractor said, we're done, they were like, okay. They were not accustomed to somebody going, wait a minute, you all aren't done. I'm not ready to sign the check yet because you still owe me, these 15 more steps. And that was where the rub started for me. I was fortunate along the way that at some point, word got out, like, you're not about to pull the wool over the city's eyes anymore because they really have an educated construction owner who is managing their projects. And so that it turned for me, but there was some tension in there. It was a couple of, probably about a half of a decade of tension where, it had to be established that I just wasn't somebody to be pushed over.
Well, I think a lot of Detroiters would appreciate somebody standing up for them in that kind of role. And obviously nothing's ever perfect, but that care and that concern matters, I think, in a lot of ways. And seeing that care and concern, I think, is part of what people get hopeful about the city with, in recent years.
I agree.
So I guess we'll end on kind of the classic Daily Detroit question for our conversations. What did you think you knew that you've learned in the time since you've been doing this? Like, what did you think you know? And then what do you know now?
Oh, I thought that this was not that big of a deal in the beginning. I didn't think that construction itself is something that just happens. You know, you pay somebody to come out and do it. I did not realize the level of detail, the level of understanding, and then you layer in the layer of public service that's required to do this particular work. I didn't realize how fulfilling I would find it later down the road. In the beginning, it was just, okay, you're going to put it together like Legos. It's really simple. There's no connection. I did not think that I would be as emotionally attached to the work as I find myself now.
LaJuan Counts, Director of Construction and Demolition with the City of Detroit, thank you so much for stopping by the Daily Detroit studio. I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much.